The laughter started before she even made it through the mess hall doors. "Hey lady, that patch for sale on eBay or something?" One of the young soldiers chuckled, nudging his buddy with a smirk. "You even know what unit that is?" The woman they were mocking didn't flinch. She just kept walking, quiet, composed, and very much alone. Her name was Lena Walker, 32 years old, 5'4", brown hair pulled back into a tight bun, and a face worn by sun and time. She looked more like a schoolteacher than anything close to a soldier. Just 3 weeks earlier, she had been assigned to Redstone Logistics Command, a support division at Fort Bridger, a remote Army training facility tucked into the rolling hills of Wyoming. But what caught everyone's attention wasn't Lena's quiet demeanor. It was the patch on her left sleeve. It was old, faded, and unmistakable. A gray wolf unit insignia. Anyone who'd spent time in uniform knew what that patch meant. Gray Wolf wasn't just any special ops outfit. It was one of the most classified, least talked about units in the military's shadow playbook. Seeing that insignia in the open was like spotting a ghost. And that's exactly what made the trio of young soldiers burst into laughter. "You're seriously wearing that?" The tallest of them barked, stepping closer. "Do you have any idea how many people have died wearing that logo?" "That's not a Halloween costume, ma'am." Lena didn't say a word. She stepped around them, took her tray, and found a seat at the far edge of the mess hall. Alone again. The murmurs were constant over the next few days. "She probably bought that patch online. She thinks she's some kind of war hero. She should take it off before someone files a complaint." But Lena Walker didn't flinch. She wore that patch every single day. She arrived before dawn, left long after the others, and never once responded to the snickers, the whispers, or the looks that followed her down every corridor. During drills and supply runs, she kept her head down. She wasn't there to prove anything. But late at night, when she thought no one was watching, some of the soldiers noticed her hand reach up to her left arm, just briefly, touching the edge of that worn patch like it was something sacred. None of them knew that she had sewn that patch on herself, with trembling fingers, in a forward operating hospital a continent away. None of them knew that 3 names were written in permanent marker on the inside of that patch. Names of men who would never come home. And none of them knew that Lena Walker had earned every single thread of it in blood. The disconnect between appearance and truth was jarring. To most of the base, Lena looked like a harmless, soft-spoken logistics tech, perhaps overly serious but mostly forgettable. There was no bravado, no medals on her chest, no unit tattoos or combat swagger, just a small woman doing a quiet job and, apparently, pretending to be something she wasn't. But judgment comes easy when you don't know the story. And they didn't know. They didn't know that in the shadows of a forgotten evacuation mission, under enemy fire and surrounded by smoke, Lena had done what no one else could, that she had carried 3 wounded teammates, one over each shoulder, one strapped to her back, out of a burning outpost, that she had called in her own extraction while bleeding, while everything around her collapsed into fire and chaos, that she was the only one who came back. But for now, all they saw was the patch, and all they saw was a woman they didn't believe belonged to the history sewn into it. So they laughed, and Lena Walker, she let them. Because some things are better left unsaid, until the moment demands the truth. 2 days after the laughter in the mess hall, Lena was summoned to the logistics office. Chief Warrant Officer Ray Dobson, a broad-shouldered man with 20 years in and little patience for nonsense, didn't even look up from his clipboard when she stepped in. "Walker," he grunted, flipping through her personnel file. "Let's cut to it. That patch you've been wearing, the gray wolf emblem, it's not listed in your service record." Lena stood at attention, silent. He finally glanced up. "You've never been assigned to special operations. Not according to this. So I need you to remove that patch from your uniform. Immediately." There was no accusation in his voice, no hostility, just the kind of cold efficiency that kept supply chains running and boots on the ground. Lena nodded once. "Understood, sir." She didn't argue. She didn't protest. She just reached up, unfastened the patch from her sleeve, and folded it, carefully, deliberately, as if she were handling something fragile. Dobson paused. You mind telling me where you got it? Her hands never stopped folding. Her eyes remained on the patch. From a friend, sir, she said quietly. He narrowed his gaze. What friend? There was the faintest shift in her jaw. Barely noticeable, but it was there. A friend who can't answer questions anymore, sir. Dobson didn't press further. Maybe it was the way she said it. Maybe it was the way she folded the patch, like it was a flag handed to a grieving mother. Either way, he nodded and let her go. But outside that office, the wolves began to circle again. By lunchtime, word had spread. She got called out. Told you she was faking. Probably got caught for stolen valor. She finally took the costume off. This time, one of the 3 young soldiers, Private Ely Turner, the loudest of the trio, didn't just whisper. He walked right up to her as she ate alone, tray balanced carefully on her lap. Hey, he said, loud enough for half the mess hall to hear. Logistics girl. Good call taking off that patch. You were making real soldiers look bad. Lena didn't move at first. She set her fork down, wiped her fingers on a napkin. Then she looked up and met his eyes, not with anger, not with pain, but with something Turner couldn't quite name. Stillness. Then, with slow precision, she stood. Across the room, the noise began to fade. Conversation stalled. Forks froze midair. People turned to watch. You think I was pretending? Lena asked softly. Turner smirked. I know you were. That unit's for ghosts and giants, not desk clerks with a hero complex. She didn't argue. She simply turned around, reached both hands behind her collar, and pulled it down. Gasps echoed across the mess hall. There, etched deep into her upper back in black ink, was the gray wolf emblem. But not just the wolf. Below it, in small burned-in letters, AM037 evase TWO, and cutting straight through the ink, harsh and raised, was a jag-burned scar, the kind that only comes from fire or an explosion. Private Turner's face lost all color. Behind him, someone whispered, That's the code for Operation Almina, Evac 2. Just then, Master Sergeant James Harlan, an old infantry lifer with a limp and a chest full of ribbons, stepped into the mess hall. The moment he saw her tattoo, his face went pale. He stepped forward. You were at Evac 2. Lena nodded and pulled her collar back into place. I was the only one who came back. The room dropped into stunned silence. No more laughter, no more whispers. And for the first time since arriving at Fort Bridger, no one looked at Lena Walker like she didn't belong. You could have heard a pin drop. The mess hall, moments ago humming with clatter and idle chatter, had fallen into complete silence. Every eye was locked on Lena Walker, who now stood in the center of the room with her back turned, calm, still, and somehow unshakable. With deliberate care, she pulled down the collar of her uniform top. Gasps rippled through the room. Across her upper back, bold and scarred but unmistakable, was the gray wolf emblem, the snarling head of a wolf encircled in black ink. But what stopped hearts cold wasn't the tattoo itself. It was what lay beneath it. Etched below the emblem in stark, military-styled font AM037 Eve CT Duo, and slicing right through the middle of the tattoo, from her right shoulder blade down toward her spine, was a thick, warp-burned scar. Not a cosmetic blemish. This was deep, old, angry skin, scar tissue from an explosion that had left permanent damage. No one spoke. No one dared. Even Private Ely Turner, the one who'd mocked her moments before, stood frozen, the blood draining from his face. It was then that Master Sergeant James Harlan, the older soldier who'd just entered, took a hesitant step forward. His voice, usually gruff and commanding, was now barely above a whisper. Evac 2, he asked. Lena turned her head just enough to glance over her shoulder. Yes, Sergeant, she said quietly. I was there. The color drained from Harlan's face. His lips parted, but nothing came out at first. Evac 2 was. He stopped, lowered his voice. That operation wasn't even on the books. Classified top to bottom. I know, Lena said. Because I was the one who called it in. A murmur stirred among the soldiers. You mean? Harlan blinked. You were the medic who? She gave a slight nod. I was the last one left. They were injured. I carried them out. She didn't say it with pride. She didn't say it with anger. She just said it like it was a weight she still carried, one step at a time. Turner's mouth opened again, but no words came. The confidence that had made him bold earlier now left him like air from a punctured tire. Someone at one of the back tables dropped their fork. Harlan finally spoke, more to the room than to Lena. Evac 2 was a disaster. I heard rumors, an ambush during a civilian evac op, high casualty count. No names ever released. No one ever confirmed who survived. He looked at her. You really were the only one. Lena pulled her collar back into place and straightened her shoulders. Yes, Sergeant. I was the only one. She picked up her tray without another word and began walking back to her corner table. But the room didn't return to normal. It couldn't, because now everyone saw her differently. The woman they had laughed at, this logistics girl, who didn't speak much and seemed out of place, wasn't pretending to be anything. She was something. Something most of them couldn't even begin to understand. She was the one who came back when no one else did. As Lena sat, the images lingered in every mind, a woman dragging her brothers through fire, calling for air support while her hands bled, holding the perimeter while enemy rounds cracked through the smoke. The scar on her back wasn't just a wound. It was proof that she'd stayed when any sane person would have run. That patch, it hadn't been a costume. It had been a promise. And the silence she had kept all this time wasn't guilt or pride or mystery. It was grief. The kind that doesn't want medals or applause. The kind that speaks only when it must. And then never again. That night the story spread like wildfire through Fort Bridger. Not as gossip, but as a reckoning. By the time the lights dimmed in the barracks, every soldier on base knew who Lena Walker really was. And more importantly, what she had survived. She didn't talk about it. She didn't need to. Because in a single moment, with a single scar, Lena had told a story that the military had buried in silence. The next morning, Lieutenant Colonel Frank Monroe, the base commander, sat alone in his office staring at his secure terminal. His coffee had long since gone cold, forgotten next to the thick red folder glowing on his screen. Giriwabula File 217B. Operation AM Zoo 37 Evave ATW Status Classified Dies Only Survivor Walker Lena A Former Roles Combat Medic Designated Marksman Outcome Sole Survivor 3 Friendly Lives Saved Rescue Coordinated Under Enemy Fire Medal of Honor Declined. He leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on a single line in the mission summary. Subject re-entered active fire zone post-detonation to retrieve dog tags, intelligence documents, and injured teammates. Final evac coordinated under duress. Refused exfil without full casualty retrieval. All 3 survivors owe current status to subject's actions. Monroe exhaled sharply. He remembered evac 2. Everyone in command did. It was whispered about in classified briefings. A humanitarian mission turned deadly, a firestorm of miscommunication, ambush, and chaos. Entirely scrubbed from public record. Just one person had made it out alive. And that person had been quietly reassigned to logistics. It didn't make sense. Until now. Back in the mess hall, Lena sat at her usual table. Alone again, but not ignored. Not anymore. The same 3 young soldiers who had mocked her now sat at a corner table, heads low, food untouched. One of them, Private Ely Turner, finally stood. His hands shook slightly as he approached. "Mom," he said, voice raw, I owe you an apology." Lena looked up, calm and unreadable. "You don't owe me anything, Private." "Yes, I do," he said. "I was completely out of line. I had no idea." "You didn't know," she replied gently, "because I chose not to tell you." Turner hesitated. "Why?" Lena paused for a long moment before answering. "Because I didn't survive for attention," she said. "I survived because 3 men needed me. And when they couldn't make it home, I had to make sure at least someone did." She reached into her pocket and placed something on the table. It was the worn, faded gray wolf patch, the one she'd been told to remove, the one stitched with her own blood in a field hospital years ago. "That patch," she said quietly, "didn't belong to me." Turner furrowed his brow. "Then why did you wear it?" Lena looked up, her eyes heavy but clear. "Because it belonged to Sergeant David Martinez. He gave it to me before he died. Told me to make sure it made it home." She paused. Wearing it wasn't about pretending. It was about keeping a promise. Turner sat down across from her, no longer ashamed, just changed. Few people on that base knew what it meant to carry a body through fire while shrapnel sliced the air. Even fewer could imagine calling in your own extraction while bleeding from the ribs, holding the line so others could live. But Lena had done it. She'd dragged Specialist Thompson, both legs shattered. She'd carried Corporal Rodriguez unconscious and burned. She'd pulled Sergeant Martinez from the flames, but not in time. His final words weren't about himself. They were about the patch. "Don't let it stay here," he'd whispered. "Take it home." And she had, not for glory, not for applause, but because promises matter, even in war, especially in war. When Lena stood to leave the table, she nodded to Turner and the others, not with judgment, but with the quiet dignity of someone who had seen more than her fair share of pain and still showed up every day to do her job. She didn't want recognition. She just wanted to honor the fallen. And now, finally, the base understood. She wasn't just the one who had come back. She was the reason others had. By the time the sun set over Fort Bridger, the base had changed. You couldn't see it in the uniforms or the morning formations. It wasn't marked by ceremony or announcement, but something unspoken had shifted, an invisible current of respect that followed Lena Walker everywhere she went. It had nothing to do with rank, and everything to do with truth. Inside his office, Lieutenant Colonel Frank Monroe stared at the screen for a long time before he finally spoke. "Why the hell didn't anyone tell me?" he muttered to himself, scrolling through the declassified portions of a file that most officers would never be allowed to see. Sub J. C.D. Walker, Lena A. Unit Grey Wolf 17 Assignment. Combat Medic Designated Marksman Operation AM-037 Evacuee de Duo Statusu Sole Survivors Lives Saved to 3D Recognition Medal of Honor declined. The language in the file was clipped. Clinical. Bureaucratic. But behind the redacted sections and terse phrases lay something heavier than ink. Lena had been deep in it. Not support. Not logistics. Not theory. She had been in the storm. The reports described a humanitarian extraction that had gone catastrophically wrong. Ambush, crossfire, building collapse, casualties, fire, chaos. And in the middle of it, one medic holding the line, stabilizing wounded teammates under fire, coordinating air support with a fractured radio, and refusing to board the last bird out until every dog tag was accounted for. Then came the line that stopped Monroe cold. Subject refused Medal of Honor, declined all interviews, transferred to logistics, request a no recognition, no reassignment. "Just give me a quiet post where I can still serve." Monroe leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. A soldier had crawled through hell, saved 3 lives, and walked away from the highest military honor in the country. And all she wanted was a supply depot in Wyoming. Across the base, the ripple continued. The young soldiers who had once scoffed at Lena now gave her a wide berth, not out of fear, but reverence. Private Ely Turner, the one who'd publicly mocked her, was the first to volunteer for weekend duty in her department. Word spread that he had requested permanent reassignment to logistics, wanting to learn how the quiet ones keep the rest of us alive. Lena noticed the shift, but she didn't say anything. She showed up on time, worked late, repaired equipment without complaint, ran her inventory checks with machine-like precision, just like before. Except now when she walked into a room, conversations didn't die because of discomfort. They quieted out of respect. That Friday, Monroe asked her to come to his office. She entered with her uniform crisp, her expression unreadable. "Walker," he said, not looking up right away. "I've read your file." "All of it?" She said nothing. You could have any post you want. Training Command DC Defense Attaché. Heck, with what's in that report, you could be teaching at Langley if you wanted." "I'm where I belong, sir," she said calmly. Monroe finally looked her in the eye. "Why logistics?" Lena's voice softened, but there was no hesitation. "Because here, I can make sure the right people get the right gear at the right time. Med kits. Radios that actually work. The kind of things that keep other soldiers from ending up like my team on Evac 2. Monroe leaned back and folded his arms. "You don't want recognition." "No, sir." "You don't want rank." "No, sir." "Then what do you want, Walker?" She paused, then answered with the same tone she'd used on the battlefield. Steady, measured, sure. "I want to make sure no one else has to carry what I do. And if that means working in the shadows so others can make it home, then that's exactly where I'll be." Monroe was quiet for a long time. Then he reached into his desk drawer and slid a small, sealed envelope across the table. "What's this?" she asked. Something I had our tech sergeant make. It's a new gray wolf patch. Re-stitched. Regulation size. But this time, it's got your name on it. Lena looked down at the envelope. Her fingers brushed over the edge, but she didn't open it. I appreciate it, sir. But I think I'll keep Martinez's in my pocket. Monroe nodded. Understood. That night, as she returned to the barracks, Lena sat on the edge of her bunk and took out the old patch, the one Martinez had handed her just before the flames took him. It was worn, frayed at the edges. The ink from the names on the back had begun to fade. But to her, it was more than fabric. It was memory. It was blood. It was a promise she still carried. She didn't pin it to her uniform. She didn't display it on a shelf. She just held it for a moment and whispered something no one else would ever hear. By dawn the next day, the base had undergone a transformation. There was no announcement, no official memo, no orders handed down. But as Lena Walker made her way across the parade ground toward the supply depot, every soldier who passed her did the same thing. They nodded, not out of obligation, not out of fear, but out of a newfound respect born from the quiet realization that they had been wrong, deeply, painfully wrong. The woman they'd once laughed at, whispered about, and dismissed as the patch lady, was now seen with a reverence typically reserved for those with silver stars on their chest or command stripes on their shoulders. Except Lena had none of that. She carried her story not on her uniform, but in her silence. And that made it all the more powerful. In the mess hall, conversation fell into a hush as she entered. There were no more jokes, no more sidelong glances. Just an awareness, unspoken but understood. At a table near the window sat Private Caleb Johnson, the youngest of the three who had mocked her just days earlier. He had barely touched his breakfast. When Lena walked by, he stood up awkwardly, tray still in hand. "Mom," he said, almost too quietly to hear. Lena stopped. Turned. "I need to say something," he continued. "I owe you an apology." She studied him for a moment. "Go ahead. I didn't know who you were. What you'd done, I judged you. And I was wrong." Lena nodded once. "You weren't wrong because you didn't know. You were wrong because you didn't think it was worth asking." Johnson lowered his gaze. "Yes, ma'am, you're right." There was a pause. Then he looked up again. "My older brother was a combat medic too. He used to say the real heroes don't talk about what they did. He said you'll know them by how they carry themselves. Quiet, steady." Lena's expression softened. "Your brother was wise. He was killed in Kandahar," Johnson added. "Tried to pull a wounded Marine out of a wrecked Humvee." Lena gave a small nod. "Then you understand." "I do now," he said. "And I wanted to ask, would it be all right if I put in a transfer request? To your unit, logistics." Her eyebrows raised slightly. "Why?" she asked. "Because I want to be part of the thing that helps bring people home. I want to make sure someone else has the gear, the meds, the support so they get another sunrise, just like you did for your team." The silence between them felt sacred. Then, for the first time since arriving at Fort Bridger, Lena Walker smiled. A real smile. "Welcome to the team, Private." That afternoon, Johnson's transfer was approved. He showed up to the depot early the next morning, already in uniform, clipboard in hand. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. He followed Lena's example, focused, disciplined, and respectful. He watched how she checked every shipment, how she verified every outgoing request, how she checked the first aid kits and hydration packs going out to field units. To her, it wasn't busy work, it was life insurance. And slowly, other soldiers took notice. A few others began showing up early too, volunteering to help, asking questions, treating the logistics tent with a kind of reverence that hadn't existed before. Because now they understood. This was where missions were won before boots hit the ground. This was where heroes like Lena were made, not with medals, but with moments no one ever saw. A week later, during a morning formation, the company sergeant major made an unplanned address. He didn't name names. He didn't mention Lena directly. He just said, "Some of you may have learned something this past week about judging people, about what real strength looks like, about how the loudest voices aren't always the ones carrying the heaviest load." He looked down the line, then added, "Don't wait until someone shows you their scars before you treat them with respect." Lena stood at attention like everyone else. But in her pocket was that same old gray wolf patch, worn, stained, and sacred. And beside her, for the first time, stood Private Johnson. He didn't speak, but as the formation broke and the soldiers dispersed, he looked to her and said, "Thank you for giving me a second chance." Lena didn't answer right away. Then she replied, "Everyone deserves a moment to realize they were wrong. It's what you do after that matters." 3 days had passed since Private Johnson joined Lena Walker's logistics unit, but the ripple effect of her story had only just begun. Something had changed at Fort Bridger. You couldn't mark it on a whiteboard or log it in a report, but you could feel it. In the way soldiers helped each other unasked, in how they checked the seals on tourniquets twice instead of once, in how a few even started tracing serial numbers by hand instead of trusting worn barcodes. Discipline became personal. Quiet professionalism returned to the center. And somewhere beneath it all was the growing recognition that not all warriors wear their battles on their sleeves, and some carry them in silence for years. Late one evening, after the depot had been locked down and Lena had filed her end-of-day reports, she returned to her desk to find a small, unmarked box. There was no name on it. Just a plain envelope taped to the top with the words handwritten in careful block letters. "Ma'am, you don't have to wear this, but we wanted you to know we see what it meant, and we'll honor it the way you always did." The note was signed by 12 soldiers. Some she barely knew. Others she'd once caught whispering behind her back. Among the signatures were Johnson's, Turner's, and even Staff Sergeant Callahan, the one who used to roll his eyes every time she walked into the mess hall. Lena's fingers trembled slightly as she opened the box. Inside, nestled in black felt, was a new gray wolf patch, freshly stitched. Clean, crisp embroidery. The thread shimmered slightly in the low light of her office. It was regulation size, but the stitching around the edge was subtly different, reinforced, like the real ones from the field. Not the kind you bought online. The kind someone made for keeps. She sat there for a long while, staring at it. She thought of the old patch, the one in her cargo pocket, frayed from time and memory. The one Sergeant Martinez had handed her with blood on his fingertips and a voice hoarse from smoke. "Don't let it die here," he'd told her. "Take it home. Let it mean something." She'd worn it in silence, defended it with dignity, folded it away not in defeat, but in reverence. And now here it was, reborn, not from hierarchy or command, but from the hearts of the very soldiers who had once doubted her. That meant more than any medal. More than any citation ever could. Lena stood, walked slowly to her footlocker, and pulled out the old patch. She placed it next to the new one stained by war, the other sewn from understanding. She didn't need both on her sleeve. They didn't belong on fabric anymore. They belonged in memory, and in the hands of those who were finally ready to carry the weight behind the symbol. She carefully folded the new patch, the same way she'd folded Martinez's that day on the battlefield, tight, precise, with every corner aligned. Then she slid it into her front chest pocket, close to her heart, not to wear, but to remember. The next morning, the first rays of sunlight glinted off the dew on the supply trucks. Lena stepped into the depot before reveal, the smell of diesel and canvas grounding her in the familiar rhythm of readiness. Johnson was already there, loading crates of rations for a field unit rotation. "Morning, ma'am," he said with a grin. She nodded. "You're early. Wanted to make sure everything's squared away." He paused, then added, "Some things are worth doing right." She smiled faintly. "Yes, they are." Outside, 2 new recruits were passing through the gates, their duffel bags bouncing against their sides, nervous eyes scanning the grounds. Johnson watched them and muttered, "I wonder how long it'll take before they realize this place isn't about rank or ribbons." Lena glanced at him. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether someone teaches them the right things before it's too late." He looked at her, understanding. "You planning to be that someone?" She gave a simple reply. "No. I just plan to be here, doing the work. The rest, that's up to them." The supply depot buzzed to life as the base came alive. But deep in Lena's pocket, stitched with care by hands that once mocked and now honored, a symbol remained, a patch never to be worn again, but never to be forgotten. Because the things we carry in silence often weigh the most. And sometimes that's where the most sacred honors belong. That night, long after the teapot had gone quiet and the base lights had dimmed into a soft amber glow, Lena Walker sat alone in her bunk. The new gray wolf patch remained folded neatly in her chest pocket. But tonight, her thoughts were not on the present. Not on inventory spreadsheets or radio parts. Tonight she reached into a smaller compartment of her footlocker, the one she rarely touched. Inside was a weathered notebook, wrapped in a piece of olive drab fabric, the kind used in field dressings. She untied it slowly. Pressed between the pages were 3 creased envelopes. Never sent, never finished. Each had a name written in faded ink. Elena Martinez, mother of Sergeant David Martinez. Catherine Thompson, wife of Corporal Alan Thompson. Emily Rodriguez, daughter of Specialist Victor Rodriguez. For years, Lena had avoided writing them. What could she say? That she'd survived while their sons and husbands and fathers had not. That she'd watched each of them fall in a storm of fire and smoke, held their hands as they slipped away, whispered promises she barely remembered making. But now something had shifted, not just on the base, inside her. It was time. She pulled out a fresh sheet of stationery military issue and uncapped her pen. The words didn't come easily. They never had. But she didn't force them. She simply wrote what was true. Letter 1 to Elena Martinez, Mom. I was with your son in his final moments. He was calm, focused even as chaos broke loose. His only concern was for the others. He gave me his patch, told me to bring it home. I wore it not for glory, but for him. I want you to know he didn't die in vain. Because of him, 3 others lived. He's still here, still protecting soldiers, still making a difference. Respectfully, Lena Walker. Letter 2 to Catherine Thompson. Catherine, I know you and Alan had only been married a year. He spoke of you constantly, said you made him feel like there was life after the uniform. In our final push, Alan shielded Rodriguez from debris with his own body. I got both of them out. But Alan, I held his hand until the end. He wasn't afraid. He said to tell you he was proud. I believe he still is. He's still with us. With deep respect, Lena Walker. Letter 3 to Emily Rodriguez. Dear Emily, you're too young to remember your father. But I hope one day you'll read this. Your dad was the bravest man I ever knew. When things fell apart, he never panicked. He kept me calm. He helped carry Thompson when I was too weak. His last words were your name. I want you to know your father saved lives, and his spirit lives on in every soldier I help get home. He's still making a difference. Elena, she read each letter once, folded them carefully, and slid them into clean, labeled envelopes. The final one she sealed with quiet deliberation, pressing the flap down like closing a chapter, one written not in ink, but in blood, fire, and memory. It was nearly midnight when Lena walked outside. The base was still, except for the occasional hum of distant generators and the rhythmic tapping of flag halyards in the breeze. She walked across the gravel path to the small, rust-red mailbox near the admin office, the same one where soldiers dropped requests for transfer, care packages, and sometimes, last words before deployment. She stood there a moment, holding all 3 envelopes in one hand. Then she whispered, so softly the night nearly missed it, mission accomplished, guys. And she let them go. Lena didn't cry. She didn't need to. Some grief is quiet. Some healing doesn't look like healing. It looks like showing up. It looks like helping one more private check a loadout list. Like folding a blanket with precision. Like nodding to someone across a crowded mess hall. Someone who used to laugh and now stands a little taller because they learned better. When she returned to her bunk, the new patch was still there, tucked beside the old one. And as Lena slid both back into their resting place, she knew something had changed. Not just for her, but for the legacy of those 3 names now carried forward, not in combat, but in conscience. She had never asked for a statue, never wanted a plaque, never accepted the medal. But now, the mission was complete. And the weight, she would always carry it. But from now on, she would no longer carry it alone. In life, we often make the mistake of judging people by what we see on the surface. How they walk, what they wear, or how loudly they speak. But true strength rarely makes a sound. Lena Walker never told anyone she was a war hero. She never spoke about the fire she'd walked through, or the lives she'd saved, or the scars that still burned beneath her uniform. Instead, she showed up, she worked hard, and she carried the memory of fallen teammates not with words, but with quiet honor. The truth is, some of the bravest souls you'll ever meet won't tell you what they've done. They'll sit beside you in line at the VA clinic. They'll hand you your groceries. They'll fix your radio and never mention the battlefield where they once called in their own extraction. Don't wait to hear the story to give someone respect. Sometimes, the people we dismiss are the very ones who carried others to safety in the dark. If someone seems quiet, humble, or worn, maybe ask why, instead of assuming who they are. Because real heroes don't need the spotlight. They just need us to listen, if we're wise enough to ask. If this story moved you, if you believe the quietest people often carry the heaviest burdens, drop a comment below and tell us, who do you honor today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, not just for the hero, but for the lesson, subscribe to the channel. Because somewhere out there, there's another Lina, and she's still keeping her promise. Let's make sure no one like her is ever forgotten again.